Welcome to I Change the Narrative, a podcast for and about Black men, inspiring, supporting, and empowering Black men and Black boys. Today, we're talking with activist, mentor, and speaker, Leon Ford. Before we start the conversation, I want Leon to tell us about himself and the work that he's involved in that lends itself to the topic and the lived experience that we're talking about today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. Leon Ford here. I am a father, a activist, entrepreneur, co-founder of a foundation in Pittsburgh, and a new author.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation today. This episode of I Change the Narrative is powered by So Organic, So Suave, also known as Sauce. Sauce is a luxury hair care and skincare refuge for those with thick hair and melanin-rich skin. From healthy beard growth to top of head hair styling to an illuminating skincare regimen, Sauce Essentials will naturally enhance your outer appearance to strengthen your inner confidence. Sauce invites you to accept the authenticity and real self-care and embrace your best. You can find Sauce's award-winning grooming essentials online at sossd.co. Again, that's sossd.co. You can also follow Sauce on Instagram and for the latest in product news and updates at sossd.co. Elevate your grooming with Sauce today. So today we're talking with Leon Ford. Like he said, he is an activist and he's a mentor and he's an entrepreneur. But one thing that I want to talk to you all about for those that are listening is the power of resilience. So we're talking with Leon. Leon, please tell us about your traumatic event that you described in your book as starting your life. You said you were starting your life in the first chapter. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, when we think about someone graduating high school, especially young men and women, we're just trying to figure out what we're going to do with our lives, and that's where I was at. I was trying to figure out what I was going to become. I had many dreams and aspirations. Unfortunately, in the midst of figuring out what my life would look like, I was stopped by Pittsburgh police officers during a traffic stop, and that traffic stop ended with me being shot 5 times and paralyzed. Not only was I paralyzed, but I was also facing up to 20 years in prison, which really, prompted my activism and, me organizing because I was literally fighting for my freedom.
Mm. And so tell us the name of your book.
The name of my book is An Unspeakable Hope. And when I think about the title of my book, we go through so much, right? When we hear about like people talk about hope and inspiration, a lot of times, especially I've heard Black people say, I don't believe in hope. We throw that word around so much. And so an unspeakable hope is a hope that can't be spoken; it can only be shown. And
Mm.
something that we spoke about before we got on camera. You said, "Man, you don't look like what you've been through,"
Mm-hmm.
and to me, that's unspeakable hope when you don't look like what you've been through, but you show it through your actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through your resilience. And I believe culturally, as Black and brown people, we are a resilient people who have been through so much, but we still are able to keep that hope, keep that inspiration, keep that joy within us, that propels us to defy the odds and live lives of without any limits or boundaries.
Absolutely. So now we're going to touch upon some different ideas and concepts in your book. I have to say that this was an awesome read. I read 19 chapters. And it was just, like I said, awesome, very moving, and gave me a sense of hope and resilience. And I couldn't help but think, man, I complain about the smallest things, but to read your life story, amazing, amazing. So I thank you for sharing your story with the world.
Thanks for taking the time to read it. it
No problem.
I was very nervous to share it because in order for me to share my story, I had to share truth, right? And a lot of times we believe that life is black and white, right? You're either good or bad. When the reality is that as human beings, we're very complicated individuals who are faced with complex circumstances where we have to make decisions, right?
Absolutely.
And those decisions, will end up having a good or bad impact on our lives or the people around us. And as you read in my book, I was faced with several different circumstances and had to make some decisions based on those circumstances. And it's very complex lived experience, and there were some interesting characters who are my loved ones, friends and family, who really tried their best, right? And I tried to really help, you know, um, one, people who don't come from the world I grew up in, to
Right.
understand how complex and complicated these relationships are, but how they're still rooted in love. There was a lot of dysfunction.
Right.
There was also, an overwhelming sense of love, which helped me, as a leader, right? Because as I go out and lead in community and try to solve these complex issues, I understand how complicated people's lived experiences are. And so if I'm able to give myself grace, I'm able to extend grace to other people.
Yeah, yeah, I love that too. How you spoke about the dysfunction of the different characters in your book. However, there seemed to be there was this common theme of, again, resilience within you all. So thank you. I love how you said in your book, I have always been a person of importance. I've always been resilient, and that your life always mattered, even in the midst of trauma, after your experience, thinking of your experience in those moments in the hospital. Talk to us about that. Where did that come from?
Yeah, when I think about my story, a lot of times people started from the moment I got shot,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
When, I'm much more than that moment. I'm not defined by a police shooting. And
Right,
the other thing is, for me, I had to, remind myself that I wasn't defined by that moment. And it's what, encouraged me and empowered me to seek larger aspirations, right? Because it's easy for us to get caught in our trauma. It's easy for, us to define ourselves by our most traumatic experiences. And so when I say, I've always been a person of importance. I'm saying that to myself, but I'm also hoping that the reader could learn that about themselves as well, because, I believe that we are all people of importance and our lives all have value, regardless of what we experience in life. And again, as you read in the book, there was so much adversity that I was faced with as a young person. And I also, had to adapt and change and evolve over time based on the mentors that I had, based on my loved ones and the environment I grew up in, but I knew that I had a calling on my life. I knew I had a purpose, and I had to lean into that purpose. And it was difficult, it was very challenging, um, but I was able to be committed and dedicated to reach the goals that I set for myself.
right. Now, did you realize you had a call on your life when after the event or before that?
I would say before that.
Okay.
Yeah, growing up, you know, my family always poured into me. I grew up around there was so much love around me. I never was told what I could not do. I was always supported, good or bad, right? And you read some of those stories where I had some ideas, and I went to my grandma like, grandma, this is what I want to do, and I was supported. And so growing up in that environment of love, like I never questioned if I was loved or
Mhm.
not. And that gave me the ability to dream big. And my dreams were directly connected to what I was exposed to. And this is why I believe that this book is very important, because it helps, the readers, that, whether it's a young person, being challenged with adversity, or it's an older person, mentoring a young person, trying to understand, what these young people are exposed to and how they're decisions are being formed. There's so many solutions that can come out of this book. And so I'm hoping that I can create a pathway for those young people faced with adversity, and also give those leaders guidance so that we can give those young people more grace, and as we seek to understand them.
Right, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about tears. You bring up tears a lot in your book, and the first time that you brought up tears, you said that you weren't allowed to share your tears or pour out because you were Little Bit's son. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, two lessons that I remember learning growing up, right? One, big boys don't cry, and two, fight fight.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because, like, in the beginning of raising my son, I remember, I'm saying fight, 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 right? Or big boys don't cry, because I inherited, those lessons from my father.
Mhm.
I quickly, changed my perspective as I began to learn and as I began to evolve as a man. But that was really, a part of my connection to my father, my
Mm.
connection with my brothers, and it's something that I had to unlearn, because I realized how problematic it was. It served a purpose, for a moment, but as I began to grow and evolve, I learned to understand that emoting was very important. And when you have people who are incapable of showing emotion,
Mhm.
or incapable of shedding those tears, letting it out, saying how they feel, they end up internalizing all that pain, and there's sickness associated with that. Uh,
Mhm.
there's a lifetime of depression and darkness associated with that. And when people tell me you don't look like what you've been through, that's because I've learned to let it out. I don't harbor that pain. I don't harbor that frustration, that anger. I don't hold on to those tears. I've learned to release those tears. I learned to feel that anger and let it go, and that has really been very transformative for me.
Yeah, I can tell that in one of your situations, actually two of those situations, that when your house was raided, and then you said you no longer felt like a soldier, and that's when you let those tears out. And then the second moment was the tragedy of Leona, and you actually admitted there that you finally gave yourself permission to cry. How has your view on crying changed with your son? What have you corrected because of what you learned through those not being able to cry?
Yeah, I create a space for my son to express himself, whether it's with tears, or however, right?
Mhm.
And so I believe that he's very much in tune emotionally, and he's comfortable. He's
Mhm.
comfortable crying to me, in a way that I wasn't comfortable crying to my dad, and I believe that, we have a very deep emotional bond. And I believe his, emotional IQ is higher than mine was at his age because he has this ability to connect directly with his emotions in a way where I was very disconnected from my emotions.
Right. How was that relationship between your dad and you now?
It's very interesting because we have different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
He's still like old school, and like don't cry. And so he's telling my, LJ, don't cry, and he gets frustrated with me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's all a balance, it's
Mm-hmm.
all a balance, and what worked for him, works for him in that era, and but I also see, where um, it holds him back,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't believe he's able to see it, right? But I'm like, Dad, you gotta let it go. You know what I mean? You have to, you should be more in touch, emotionally. But it's so hard for him because you know, you're talking about 50 plus years of cultural conditioning, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, again, the grace. I give my dad so much grace and love because I understand he grew up in a different, environment than I grew up
Yeah.
in a different era. And so I just love on him, despite our differences.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Talk to us about there was an affirmation that meant the world to you when your dad looked at you, or you looked at yourself as the thorough little nigga.
Mm. Yeah, when you talk about a subculture, right,
Mm-hmm.
within a community, especially African American communities, that's
Yeah.
like a rites of passage,
Yeah.
for some families.
Yeah.
And I was raised by hustlers. I was raised by men who for their form of activism was to hustle,
Mm.
right? And it was a environment where they found a market where they felt liberated because they didn't have to depend on the white man, let's say. They could be their own bosses. They were innovators. They were philanthropists.
Mm-hmm.
They gave back to community in many different ways. And so it's something that a lot of people don't understand unless
Mm-hmm.
you grow up in that space. And so I wanted to share that because that meant so much to me for my dad to call me thorough or say I was going to be a hustler. And I wanted to be more like my father than I did, Michael Jordan, because, he was a real person. He was reachable and he had the cars that the rappers had and the ball players had. And we lived a good life, and there's this misconception that people who grow up in the hood are poor. We weren't poor. We were, we had everything we wanted, and um, that affirmation, I just grew up believing it. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting, as much as I evolved, parts of me still resonates, with those affirmations and the culture connected
Right.
to that affirmation. And it's a constant journey of growing
Mm-hmm.
and questioning and reflecting and letting go of some things and holding on to other things. It's very complicated. Again, this is where my grace comes from. Like, my grace doesn't come from me, saying like, I'm perfect and I just love everybody. My grace comes from me understanding dysfunction and how, deeply rooted dysfunction can be in our lives. And we can hold on to some things that connects us to our loved ones that we know may or may not be right in other spaces.
Right.
So it's very complicated.
Yeah. It seems like, as I was reading your book, from your childhood with your parents and to the life that your father led and things that were going on in your mom's home, it seems like that history was kind of repeating itself with you? Would you say that?
Yeah, in many ways. In many ways, it's like from me growing up in that environment, again, there was so much love, but there was also a level of dysfunction.
Right.
And that dysfunction is learned behavior. And so when I listen to stories from my grandfather, and his interactions with my grandmother, when I
Mm-hmm.
think about my early experiences with my parents, what they went through, when I think about, what I went through personally in my interactions with my son's mom, right? There's,
Right.
all of these different similarities in those experiences. And I hear a lot of people talk about breaking generational curses,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that, you know, it, in order to break those generational curses, you have to acknowledge the generational trauma, right? And you have to understand that some of these things that we experience was so far out of our control.
Right.
And in order to get into control, right, we have to understand why these things played out. And as I began to ask these questions, to ask my mom questions, my father, my grandfather, I learned so much more about myself. And so I was able to hold on to things that I felt would serve me well and let go of those things that, I deemed to be dysfunctional.
Right. Right. That's good. Um, it also seems like, as I was reading, that your mom knew or sensed that something was about to go down, and you sensed that something was about to go down with your life. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So for me personally, I had a sense that something was going to happen, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was going to be to somebody around me.
Mm.
I didn't necessarily think it was going to be me. My mom, on the other hand, she's a dreamer, right? She would have these dreams, and she's like, "You gotta get out of Pittsburgh." I had wanted to go to school for digital filmmaking and video production, and my mom signed me up for school in Atlanta to go to, I believe it was the Art Institute, and she really wanted me to leave Pittsburgh so badly. But as a teenager, I'm like, Mom, you're nagging me. I ain't trying to hear that.
Right.
And she just wanted what was best for me. And I was thinking she only wanted what was best for me. But really, there was this deeper intuition that she had that I would experience something traumatic. And unfortunately, that ended up happening.
Hmm. Yeah. Explain your hate. Explain your hate towards white people at the time.
Yeah. Oh, you got the good question. I
Yeah.
I, I love it's I've done so many interviews,
Hmm.
and you're asking these questions that are like, yeah, I love them.
Thank
So I woke up in the hospital after being shot. I was shackled to the bed, right? There was a police officer in my room, and my family didn't know, where I was at, right? And so, after, several weeks, my family was able to visit me. I finally had my phone, and one of the first things that I did was I went online to read about what happened to me. And the article read, Black teen shot by white officer. Up until that point, I never made it a race thing. I was just like, man, this cop shot me. And so I'm reading this article, and then I went and read the comments. And if I don't know if you've ever read some of the comments on these police shootings or
Yes.
yeah. So I read the comments. So many racial. I mean, every comment was racial, saying the worst things about me and my family. And I just told myself, in that moment, I hate all white people,
Hmm.
everybody, not just police officers. That was followed by my doctors and nurses just being so good to me. And I said, I hate all white people but them.
Right.
And then, I always talk about my sixth grade teacher, Miss Shank.
Mm-hmm.
Like the moment I walked into her classroom in the sixth grade, I was the teacher's pet. She just loved on me. And when my sister passed away when I was in the eighth grade, Miss Shank just loved on me even more. I wasn't one of her students, right? I didn't have her class, but she would still like bring me to her class for lunch and everything, and really helped me navigate that process in school. Um, and so I said, I hate all white people, but these doctors, my nurses, and Miss Shank. And so, as people would show up in my life and who are good people, they slowly began to soften my heart.
Mm.
And I think that message is very important because one, I don't think, most people would say, right, like they hate all whoever, right, publicly, right,
Right.
especially in like in a position like mine. And I just wanted to be very honest about that because that was a real feeling, it was a real experience. And I also wanted to show those individuals that even, when you are able to express yourself, to express that hate, when you're able to feel it, you can still keep your heart open for those good people that will show up and show you all of us aren't the same, right? Like there are some good people, and the more good people that you meet, it's hard to say you hate all of anyone.
Right. Right. That is a truth. That's good insight. But I want to take it back a little bit further. You said you talked about revolutionary suicide and how you studied the art of death. Can you explain that?
Yeah, I really leaned into a lot of leaders, black men who gave their lives to the movement, who like are some of the most charismatic men, like and speakers that I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
And they used a lot of history to pull on hate, and it's hard, like, and some of these people are very controversial figures, like Khalid Muhammad, right?
Yes.
Like I would watch Khalid Muhammad videos all day, and I would watch him on like Donahue and hear some of the things he said, and it was like so inspirational to me
Mm-hmm.
at the time. And George Jackson, and I learned about his story and about how his brother, tried to, he kidnapped the judge and a few of the jurors. And I was in such a dark place. I didn't want to live, right? I was suicidal, but I knew that I didn't have it in me to kill myself.
Mm.
Right? And so my suicidal thoughts turned into homicidal thoughts. And I looked at these revolutionary men and said, this is how this is how I'm going to go out. Right? I already, lost my life. I don't want to live. And so if I'm, going to die, I'm gonna make it purposeful.
Mm. What have you learned about revenge?
Revenge. Wow, that's a really good question. I don't believe revenge is justice.
Mm.
One of my favorite books and movies is The Count of Monte Cristo. I don't know if you ever read it. It's about a guy named Edmond Dantes, who's his best friends and a few other people basically set him up, and he went to prison for I believe 13 years, and he was able to break out of the prison and found all this gold and went back and got revenge, right? And
Mm.
he was very calculated in how he got revenge, and he realized that even once he got that revenge, it didn't feel like justice,
Mm.
right? and,
Mhm.
and so when we talk about justice, right, and I wrote about this, but when I think about justice, I think about the scales of justice, right? and,
Right.
and it's hard to get any type of balance after you experience such traumatic, events in your life. And so what is justice? How do you restore balance? Right. And so if I, killed the officer who shot me, or a officer, or paralyzed him, or harmed someone in his family, that still wouldn't make me feel better. It still doesn't take away from the pain that I endured. Even if I began to walk tomorrow, I still endure so much trauma and adversity. So it's hard to balance out the scales. And so for me, I believe that you can curate justice, and I've really found that being innovative and leading with love has brought me more joy, um, than causing someone harm, would have brought me. And I think about how far I've come. Like, if I would have, harmed the officer, and, was suicidal, and, did something to an officer and lost my life, you know, I would have been on the news, for a few cycles, and then no one would know my name. I wrote about Chris Dorner in my book, right? He was a former police officer who killed several police officers, and I remember watching him on the news and felt like he was like getting justice for me, and so many other people. And then, no one remembers his name.
Hmm.
No one talks about him, or that experience. And so leading with love, it's so transformational, right? It empowers you, and it empowers people, and then you're able to even win over the hearts of people who may have opposed you when you were so angry and hateful. And so I have really amazing relationships with police officers today. In fact, my co-founder of my foundation is the former police chief,
Right.
right? And so, when I think of justice, I think of legacy, and legacy as a father means that, you know, the decisions that I make today will influence my son tomorrow. And so if I let my depression win, and if I decide to cause physical harm to somebody or myself, then what message is that sending to my son? Right. But when I'm able to be innovative, to be creative, to be open minded and pure hearted, I'm able to set an example for my son that, helps him to overcome any adversity and still keep his sanity and his joy.
Yeah. Are there any dark days for you?
There are.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't believe, a lot of times when we talk about forgiveness, people think it's the threshold that you cross, and it's like, I made it and I'm in the promised land. But that's not a reality. The reality is, like, some days I wake up and my back is in pain, and I'm having spasms, and I'm like, man, I wasn't born like this, and I have some struggles. But that's the reality of, excuse me, being a human being.
Hmm.
Right? You're going to have dark days. You're going to have highs. You're going to have lows, and that's the beauty of life. And I tried my best to convey that in my memoir, because, especially in my city, because I was able to talk about forgiveness and show that through my actions. I'm often painted as like a Christ-like figure, right? Where people kind of put me up on a pedestal and they say, Leon Ford is just so amazing. I don't know how you were able to forgive. And, in my book, I try to show the reader that I'm a human being. I have good days and bad days, but I always make a conscious decision to, do the right thing, and say the right things. I firmly believe that, the power of just being a good human being, right? And a good human being doesn't mean that every day is going to be good. Being a good human being means that you're choosing to be good despite those bad days.
Right. Right. Thank you. When did you discover your voice as a Black man?
Ooh, That's a really good question.
Thank you.
I would say I discovered my voice as a Black man after I was shot. Years after I was shot, I believe that it was relationships with mentors, like my mentor Jason Rivers, like Brother Malcolm, who I wrote about, Travian Shorters, Stephen DeBerry, Lenny McAllister. Like I had these, Black men, Brother Victor Muhammad, who really poured into me, and
Mm,
helped me to understand not only my voice as a Black man, but the responsibility of my voice as a Black man. And
right.
that responsibility is, had a lot to do with why I made some choices to choose love,
Mm,
right? Again, I had to consider what legacy am I leaving behind?
mhm,
What message am I sending? And am I speaking from my suffering, or am I speaking from my aspirations?
wow.
And they helped me, like especially Travian. He has what he calls the asset framing, where he teaches us how to see ourselves as assets to our community. And as I learned that framework, and I said I'm an asset to my community, and as an asset to my community, I can't lead where I won't go. We have a affirmation, and every time I speak, I share this affirmation, and it reads, it's like a call and response. So I say it, and the youth or whomever I'm speaking to will repeat it back to me. And this: we
Right.
must give up to go up. We must give up to grow up. We must give up on the way up, and give up even more to stay up. I cannot teach what I do not know. That's one of my favorite parts.
Right.
Cannot teach what I do not know, and I cannot lead where I will not go. I am because we are. We are because I am. I am my brother's keeper. I am my sister's keeper. I am destined for greatness because I attract what I am. And so when I think about legacy, I
Mm,
cannot teach what I do not know, and I cannot lead where I will not go. And so that's why I choose love.
mm. That's good. That's good.
Thank you.
All right. Um, because of your traumatic event, talk about the doors that opened up for you. There were some individuals that came into your life. Don't mention the good minister just yet, because I have a separate question about him. But I understand that Tiana Taylor reached out to you, Keisha Cole, the Nation of Islam, the Quakers. Talk to us about that, because that right there, when you mentioned the Quakers, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, in the beginning, so this is like Black Lives Matter just starting to pick up some steam. It's not popular to get behind or support someone who was shot by a police officer. And I was longing for support. And so obviously the neighborhood supported me. Uh, but then the Quakers reached out. And so I had no idea who the Quakers were.
Wow.
And Pittsburgh's very black and white, and so they were mostly white people. There were a few black people that, were a part of the Quakers, and they were so committed to helping me fight for justice. They literally came to serve. And to this day, I probably don't have any photos with them,
Wow.
right?
Mhm.
They, I don't know if they put me on their newsletter or what. Like, they just showed up. They didn't care about any attention. They didn't, care about, being in a book or anything like that. They just were like riding for me and, showing up to protest, showing up to my court hearings. It was interesting. They showed up to my court hearing not to, participate or anything, but they saved seats for my family. right? So they knew that there were limited seats. They would come early, take up the seats, and make sure my family had seats. And they would sit in the hall and just make sure we ate and just love. They just loved on us, which was phenomenal. And I remember there was a older white woman who shared the history of Quakers and the abolitionist movement and how involved they were with the Underground Railroad. And I thought that was very interesting and powerful. And they wanted to support my cause and many other causes, but they just didn't know how to reach out, right? And so, it really showed me that there are some allies who want to reach out that, don't know how to reach out. And sometimes as activists, we can be very off putting
Mm-hmm.
and that off-putting, those mannerisms can really, prevent us from having some powerful allies who are really there to support us.
Right, right. Um, okay. So Minister Farrakhan enters the scene. He enters the building. He plays a significant role in your life. That right there.
Yeah,
Amazing.
the nation, and I know the nation is a controversial group, and they stepped up for me. I can go to any city in America, and the nation, they will find me, provide security for me, just look after me. And they were another group that didn't want to be in the cameras, right? In fact, I had an event last year, and Brother Victor, who is a near and dear mentor of mine, he understood there was some controversy around the nation and the anti-Semitism, uh, you from like Kyrie Irving and like that whole ordeal. And he said, brother, I'm not sure, I love you and I support you, but I know there's some controversy around the nation, and I don't want anybody to label you as an anti-Semite. We know your heart, and we love you, but we just, and that's how much they love me,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they, and they've just been really, really good to me, just showing up, just giving me guidance, giving me advice, and even meeting the minister,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's this public persona of the minister,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's like him as a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a human. And, sitting down with him, at his home,
Mm-hmm.
Chicago was so powerful because I didn't sit down with the persona.
Right.
I sat down with the man, and he was just like, it was like talking to my grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
So much. He was very generous, very thoughtful, very loving, and to everybody, you
Right.
and he gave me some, really good advice about people, about good and bad people and allies and things that, people wouldn't expect to come from the minister,
Right.
and so I'm very, I believe I'm very fortunate, for that opportunity, and it's interesting because I even have relationships with the ADL, right? Like, so I know Jonathan Greenblatt, and
Right.
I, good, relationship with him as well. So I often find myself, you know, um, connected in a very unique position. But I just lean on love, and I don't judge people, even when they're judged by other people. I just try to listen and hear people out and get to know the person because I've been a victim of the media myself, where
Right.
the media portrayed me as being a bad person, but I knew my heart, and so I love people and I give grace, and I try my best to listen and gain wisdom from all types of people.
Right. That's good. Um, one piece of advice that Minister Farrakhan gave you. Do you remember anything that he said to you that stood out?
Yeah, well, so this is not advice,
Okay.
you know? Well, maybe kind of. Um, he told me that I was baptized in a fire,
Yes, I remember that.
and
Yes.
the fire purified me, right? So the fire, you know, didn't burn me; it burned what I was not, and that's what gives me the ability to really, have an impact on people. And he told me, whatever I choose to do with my life, I will succeed. Right. So be very, intentional about what I spend my time on
Yeah.
because, you know, it can be good or bad,
Mm.
you know, and, in another conversation with not with the minister, but with another brother from the nation,
Mhm.
we were talking about what the minister, said to me, and that brother told me, he said, "Yeah, that is the truth." He said, because people don't say this, but the hero and the villain oftentimes have the same origin story,
Yeah.
right? And it's the perspective of their circumstances that makes them either, lead with love or lead with hate, you
Mm,
know. And so, I decided to lead with love and, have a positive impact on the people around me.
that's good. That's good. Well, we have Minister Farrakhan, and then we have the formula. I refer to him as the formula. We have Benjamin Crump. Go for it.
So, Benjamin Crump is he's a figure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hire him. I reached out to him, on social media, and he showed up. And I can't take that away from him. Like he's going to show up, and he brought national attention, to my story in
Mm-hmm.
many different ways, and I'm really appreciative of that.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, my dad and I, we decided to let him go. And again, my dad has dealt with several attorneys, and um, it was our understanding that Attorney Crump likes the media a lot. You know,
Loves. Yes.
yeah, he loves the media, and so I remember sitting with my father, and my dad's like, listen, this guy, he want to be in the cameras, and we need somebody who wants to win in court, right? And so we decided, and the advice that I got from my father was like, we'd rather have a money hungry attorney,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they want results. Their win is in the courtroom,
Right.
right? Than an attorney who wants the media attention, because their win is when they're able to get the largest platform on TV. And so we decided to let him go, and I believe it was a really good choice for several reasons. One, had I had his platform that early on, and and my story would have become more amplified, I don't think I would have been able to share the messages that I'm sharing today. I don't think I was ready for that. I think that was God's way of letting me to evolve into my own leader with my own voice. um, because back then I was young and I was more impressionable. And, there's been a narrative that lives within those circles of influence that I don't share. I think I have a different perspective um, that unifies more people than divides people, but there's still a level of truth and authenticity.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm turning my back on community, and I'm leading them down a path for my benefit. It's more thoughtful. It's a thoughtful approach that acknowledges how complicated life is, how complicated leadership is,
Mm-hmm.
and I try not to be prescriptive, but kind of offer a different take on these experiences.
Right. Well, you answered that question very well. And I love it. I love the grace that you answered that particular question, because there were things in my mind already that I had already sensed some of the things that you spoke about in the book in reference to, that gentleman. So thank you for that.
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
what do you mean by you started to study the art of living? I just so appreciated that.
Yeah, I have a mentor that says life is for the living, right? And the art of living, like, how do we want to live?
Mhm.
What, like, when we think about quality of life, right? How do we create or curate quality of life? And so I began to read different messages, and different books that really inspired me. One of the first was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle,
Mm,
right? That
mhm.
really inspired me and helped me to become more mindful. Another book that really inspired me was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho,
Yeah.
and I often see myself as Santiago, and Santiago had many different ups and downs, right?
Mhm.
But each low moment led into another moment that helped him, fulfill his personal legend, right,
Mhm.
or his life's purpose. So if he never would have got robbed, he never would have met the crystal merchant, right? And if he would never would have met the crystal merchant, he would have never, um, you know, um, joined the caravan to go to the oasis, right, and so on and
Right.
so. And so, reading these different pieces of literature, studying what it meant to live a good life and
Mhm.
lead a good life, really gave me perspective. And so, um, although, like, being shot is a very traumatic experience, I thought
Mhm.
about, how it led me down a path of significant purpose.
Mhm.
Right? And, although if I could take it back, right, I
Mhm.
can live a normal life, I absolutely will, selfishly.
Mhm. Right.
um, but I cannot, you know, underestimate, like, the impact that I'm having now,
Mhm.
and how meaningful it is to even impact some of my relatives who I've been able to help change their perspectives as well. And so studying the art of living is just that. What does it mean to live,
Yeah.
right? What does it mean to, move from survival to thriving,
Right.
right? And there's been some research on post-traumatic growth, and that's why some people succeed, after a traumatic experience. And
Mm.
I learned these things, and applied these principles to my life, reading, like, the four agreements, right,
Mm.
or some of the Buddhist principles, right, the four noble truths, right. So
Right.
I was in such a dark place that I was finding inspiration wherever I could get it.
Right.
I was reading Stoicism, right, and understanding, the Socratic, philosophies versus a more Machiavellian philosophy,
Mm.
right, and love versus fear. Like, I really got into, like, psychology and philosophy to help me understand life,
Mhm.
the many complexities of life, and that really helped shape my perspective. It helped me love more, even in the midst of so much pain. It helped me to be inspired, and even in the midst of hopelessness.
Right.
And so, those experiences, and reading, that literature, really transformed my perspective and helped me move from being very depressed and, hopeless to having that unspeakable hope and inspiration.
Well, Leon, you have definitely inspired our listeners. I know with your story, you have inspired our listeners. Please tell our listeners how they can purchase your book.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Okay.
So you all can purchase my book online. It's on Barnes and Noble, Amazon. If you go to Simon and Schuster's website and type in Leon Ford and Unspeakable Hope, it'll pop right up. And if you have local bookstores, in your cities, I would encourage to support those local bookstores. And if they don't have it, they can order it for you. So just order an Unspeakable Hope by Leon Ford.
Thank you for that.
Thank
Also,
you.
tell our listeners how they can contact you if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to maybe invite you for a speaking event.
Absolutely. So you could reach me on across social media at Leon Ford Speaks, and my website is leonfordspeaks.com.
Thank you for that. Leon, your story has been, like I said, an inspiration. I thank you for taking the time to be on the show, to share your story, to highlight your experiences, your lessons, and your expertise in grace, forgiveness, and revenge. Um, and also for doing your part by being a part of changing the narrative. And lastly, for keeping your commitment by being a part of this show. That means a lot. For merch, visit iChangeTheNarrative.org. Thank you to our sponsors, So Organic, So Suave. You can follow Sauce on Instagram for the latest in product news and updates. Visit sossd.co. Don't forget to follow us on TikTok, IG, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at iChangeTheNarrative. That's all one word. We've added a weekday pop-up segment. We'll see you soon, and thank you all so much for listening.